Alright, y'all, welcome back to American Government and Politics. For Simmons College, summer semester of 2020, and this will be the last video of the summer semester. I know we have a lot to cover, and more importantly, I need to explain some housekeeping items to y'all about your grades. And also let you know that I am in the middle of the woods. I'm in the woods, I'm on a hillside. If you're watching this video, it means that I was able to roam this hillside and get somewhere up a little higher and get a signal on my phone to upload this thing to YouTube. So if you're watching it, that means I was successful. Alright, as far as class content goes, y'all, we're going to cover two things. Two big issues today. One are a bunch of constitutional amendments. We've talked some about the Constitution, but we'll talk a lot more today about the amendments to the Constitution that spell out specific rights of Americans that we have as people who are citizens, but also just people who are within the borders of the jurisdiction of the United States. Also going to talk a bit about the civil rights movement. This is the first time I've combined these two into one lecture, so you may want to take a break in the middle. I'll let you know when we're going to transition from one topic to the next, but the topics are also related, and this won't be a super long video regardless. So as far as some housekeeping items, I want to tell y'all something, and that is that I was mistaken about when final grades are due. They're actually due on Monday, the 27th, this coming Monday. So I want to make a deal with y'all. We have not done the third quiz according to syllabus, and we certainly have not done the final exam. So what I will ask y'all to do is let me combine those, the last quiz and the final exam. That'd be 30% of your grade into one assignment. And that assignment is due Sunday, the 26th. I know that's a quick turnaround, but it will just be one question, one very important question. So bear with me. Listen to this video, get to the end of the video, and I'll assign the quiz and, of course, the quiz/final, your final assignment for this class. And, of course, I will also include the assignment in the email. That if you're watching this video, you got the email. All right. So, United States Constitution. We have talked about it somewhat without, in this class already, without talking specifics. We talked about Article 1, whether we spelled it out or not, when we talked about Congress and the powers of Congress. Articles 2 and 3. That is the presidency and the judicial branch of the government. We talked about those things, but I want to move into the amendments. The amendments are kind of a big deal. They're a huge deal, really, because the amendments to the Constitution, which are found in the appendix of your textbook, they're also in, well, you can Google them. They're online. You can Google United States Constitutional Amendments, and they'll pop up. Or you can Google them one at a time, and you'll get them that way. But if you want to see them in paper and print, they're in the appendix of your textbook. But let's talk a bit about them, though. I'm going to cover for this class, for this lecture, something you really need to know. That's the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, and then three that came a little later that are very important in this country today, and that's the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendments. When I was in high school in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, my AP U.S. history teacher was a black woman who was originally from Louisville, and she told us that if you don't get anything else out of that class, AP U.S. history, then she wanted us to know the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, because they were so incredibly important, and still are to this day, when it pertains to black people, people of color, minorities, and really all Americans, because we're all in this together. At least we're supposed to be. At least that's how I see it. And we'll talk about that a little more. But and then after the amendments, I'll talk about the civil rights movement. I'm going to greatly oversimplify the civil rights movement and make the case that the civil rights movement is not over. So, amendments to the Constitution. These are important. I mentioned more than once in the syllabus and so forth about how I want y'all to learn why American government and politics and the subjects we discuss are important to you. How are they relevant to you, your life, your family, your friends, your life today, the year 2020 in the United States? How does this all apply to you? And nowhere is that easier to illustrate than these amendments. The First Amendment to the Constitution. And I'm not going to read all these out loud to you, but this one's a very simple one, so I'll tell you. It's Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or of the right of the people to peaceably assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. All right, that's a bunch of stuff, but what it really means is that the federal government does not have the ability, does not have the right to restrict how you worship, meaning you have the right to choose how you worship, or not to. You can have religion, or you can have no religion. It's really up to you, and the government is not supposed to be able to interfere in that. Freedom of speech and freedom of the press, that's a huge deal. Freedom of speech means that I can go out here and say whatever I want, and the government can't do anything about it. Is that always the case? No. But up to a point, we have a right to free speech. And freedom of expression. Freedom to peaceably assemble. What does all that mean? Well, a couple things. One, it means what it sounds like. Two, all of these amendments, any rights specified in the Constitution and the constitutional amendments, really should have, at the end of them, it should say up to a point. Why do I say that? Well, because the government actually can interfere with your freedom of speech if your freedom of speech is, if your free speech, if the speech you're saying, just saying whatever's on your mind, however you feel, if it harms other people. They can also interfere with your right to practice your religion if you're harming other people. What is that? What do I mean by that? I mean, I have a right to free speech. I can say messed up things about other people that may or may not be true. But if what I'm saying advocates violence and incites violence, that can be a problem. The government might get involved. Same thing with religion. I have a right to be religious if I want to be, and the government's not supposed to interfere. In my case, I'm Baptist. All right, well, what if my interpretation of my religion meant that God wants me to do violence to other people because they're not Baptist? Well, that would be illegal. I'd get charged with assault and battery or murder or whatever my crime was. And so the government could interfere. So you have a right to free speech and religion up to a point. The free speech thing is a lot more important today than it has been sometimes in the recent past. Why? Well, a number of reasons, not the least of which is that the President of the United States likes to call out members of the media who are saying things they believe to be true that he believes to be untrue. Presidents have always done that, but this one does it all the time, and does it any time he doesn't like what the person's saying. But we at least theoretically have a right to free speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press. Freedom of the press means freedom for media to report whatever they want to. Now, when I say the government can't intervene, it doesn't mean you can't sue me for saying something bad about you. If I'm trying to exercise my First Amendment right to free speech, and I say that one of you all in this class is a murderer, you committed murder, and people hear that, and it harms your reputation, you can sue me. You can totally sue me, and probably win. So these things are all a little bit more complicated than the text of the amendments make them sound, but it's super important stuff, and it's all theory. We have these rights, and I'm going to move on along to the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution. This is the right, freedom against illegal search and seizure. I mentioned, I believe, the first or second video of this summer semester. I mentioned the fact that the police can only go so far when it comes to searching people legally. Now they can do whatever they want, and then you can challenge it in court if you think you've been searched illegally. But the actual text of the amendment: the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects, that means possessions, against unreasonable searches and seizures, shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. In other words, if the government is going to come and take you into custody or take any of your property for evidence, they better have a good reason. That's what this says. That's what it means. Is that always the case? Kind of depends, doesn't it? Don't forget that with any of these things, if you want to challenge the government's actions they've taken against you, you're probably going to need a lawyer to do that. Lawyers aren't cheap. Well, some are cheap, but for the most part, lawyers are not cheap. And you have a right to challenge the government if you believe that they've violated these rights. In fact, that was in the First Amendment, right to petition the government. All right, so Fourth Amendment's a big one, and what it really boils down to, it is theoretically against the Constitution and against the law in this country. The Constitution is the ultimate law. It is theoretically against the law for a police officer to walk past your house, not hear, smell, or see anything unusual, but just think, I feel like searching that house, and go in and search the house. Maybe they find some contraband, some marijuana inside, and they arrest you for it. They can't just do that. If they smelled marijuana, it might be different. If someone told them, hey, that guy's got weed in his house, well, what does the officer do then? He's supposed to go get a warrant. That's what the Fourth Amendment's about. Get a warrant, tell a judge, this is my evidence. This is why I believe the evidence is credible and true. May I please have a warrant, which is the judge giving permission to search the house. Same thing with vehicles. Same thing with your person, your bodily person. In theory, officers aren't supposed to be able to just stop and frisk, pat someone down, and see if they may or may not have some drugs or a gun or something else on them. They're supposed to have a reason, what the Constitution calls probable cause. That's just a good reason to search someone. Does that always work in practice? Well, no, clearly it doesn't. But when it doesn't work out that way, it's against the law, and you have a right to challenge that officer's actions. Going on to the Fifth Amendment, another really important one. I'm not going to read it out loud. Y'all can all read, and this is a little bit longer. But this is the one that says that two big things. One, this is the one you may have heard in a lot of fiction, whether like on TV or movies. People say they plead the Fifth. I plead the Fifth Amendment. That's when a judge is asking someone to give evidence that could lead to their own conviction in a crime. Meaning, let's say I'm accused of that scenario earlier where a judge found some marijuana in my house, and I'm accused of a crime, possession of marijuana, so I'm on trial, and judge says, Mr. Gray, is that your marijuana that police found in your house? If I answer that question truthfully, that would be evidence against myself, and we have a right to not be forced to give evidence against ourselves. You have a right. You can confess if you want, but they can't force you to do that. At least that's what the Constitution says. Does it always work out that way? Sometimes, but that's what the Constitution says in the Fifth Amendment. So it has these words about you can't be forced to provide evidence against yourself. There's something else in here, though, that's really, really important, and it is relevant right now, today, in the United States in a big way. I'm going to start in the middle of this Fifth Amendment and read to you. Nor shall any person be subject... Let's skip ahead a little bit. I'm sorry, I skipped ahead there. Nor shall any person be subject to be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. It's saying the government shall not deprive any of us of life, liberty, or our personal property without due process of law. That's a really important part of the Constitution, and a really important part of the laws of this country. What is due process of law? It means kind of what it sounds like. There has to be a process, an objective, reasonable process. The government can't just say, you owe money, you owe taxes, so we're going to take your car. Well, they do that. They can do that, but with a process. There must be a legal process to it. They can't just come take it. It doesn't just say property, though. It says life or liberty. So the government can't just execute someone without due process of law. What about that liberty piece? Let's say that I am someone who's gone to protest Not saying that I don't like police and I don't like government, but I'm just saying, so not protesting so much as demonstrating. I'm demonstrating that I believe that Black Lives Matter. Let's say I want to go demonstrate that fact. And so I'm in Portland, Oregon, and just by being in the streets peacefully demonstrating, if a government agent takes me, puts me in handcuffs, puts me in a car and hauls me away, they have deprived me of liberty, my liberty meaning my right to do whatever I want, without due process of law. The way it's supposed to work is if an officer believes you have committed a crime, they arrest you, they read you your rights, they tell you what crime they are charging you with, and they put you in the car. They take you to jail and they hold you until you meet bail or bond, until you're released, or until you go to trial to see if you're actually guilty or not. And that's the way that's supposed to work. Does it always work that way? No. But generally it does until recently, and depending on your crime, depending on your race and socioeconomic status, it generally works that way in this country, where there's a due process before you can be deprived of your liberty by the government. But right now that's becoming relevant in ways that it hasn't been in a while for people of all races and ethnicities and national origins. So this is a tough one today, and it's a hard thing to talk about, but it's important. Okay, so I'm going to start talking about these 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, and then move into the Civil Rights Movement. And as I promised, I'm going to greatly oversimplify it. And before, on these topics of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, as well as the Civil Rights Movement itself, those are specific topics that, and they can also be more broad topics that are discussed in more detail by different professors in different classes at Simmons College. And if you're interested in these topics and haven't already had those classes, I recommend taking them. Take a look at either talk to your advisor or the administration at the college, or take a look at the class schedule for next semester and see what all's out there. But I do this very broadly. I believe it's an injustice. It's doing more of a disservice. It's a disservice to teach y'all about American government and politics without talking about civil rights movement and Amendments 13 through 15. But I just I hit them very quickly here, so you get a little bit of it, and then I'll do that. Then I'll talk about the final exam / quiz 3, your final assignment for the semester. All right, so go back in time a little bit. It's the 1865, the year 1865. The United States has just fought a really bloody, terrible war. 700,000 dead Americans. North fights the South over the issue of slavery. If anyone ever tells you that the American Civil War was over anything but slavery, I'd tell them to do a little research. I'd also point them in the direction of something called the Cornerstone Speech by a man named Alexander Stephens. He was the vice president of the so-called Confederate States who waged war against the United States over the issue of slavery. And his Cornerstone Speech was one where he, at the beginning of the Civil War, he outlined why the South was fighting, why his government, his new government, so-called government, was fighting the Union, the United States, the northern states. And he said it was because it was over the core issue that the white race was dominant to the black race, and the black race was inferior, and the white race had to keep them subservient. And I'm paraphrasing, but it's a really horrible, aggravating, terrifying in these times today thing to read. But it explains what that war was really about for the Southerners who fought the northern states over the issue of slavery, and they fought that war over slavery. That's what the war was about. People say it was about states' rights. States' right to do what? A state's right to allow slavery in their borders. And over half the people in this country thought that that was not okay. That was not cool. That there never should have been slavery, and it was time to bring it to an end. So again, I'm oversimplifying, but what I'm saying is true. It's historically accurate. So 1865, at the end of a 4-year, very bloody, very long, well, there are longer wars, but that one was the bloodiest in American history, and a nasty, nasty war. All wars are nasty and terrible, and it was a terrible war. And the country is in a bad place politically, and emotionally. But there are some issues. There are still some issues about getting these southern states to come back into the Union. And first and foremost, the federal government says we have to make it very clear to these people meaning the Southerners who've waged the war, we will not allow slavery. People held against their will to do work they don't want to do. Well, you don't know if they want to or not. You haven't asked them. You're forcing them at penalty of physical violence, at penalty of imprisonment or death, to do work for no wages. We're not going to allow that anymore. And so the federal government passes the 13th Amendment to the Constitution with one major exception. They say there will be no slavery, no involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. Meaning, you can force prison inmates to do involuntary labor. That's what that means. So, pretty big exception there. But the main takeaway here is that the federal government said, all right, we got to pass a part of the Constitution that says no more slavery. And they did the best they could and passed the 13th Amendment. The 14th Amendment is a big one because prior to the Civil War, there had been this discussion raging in this country about who do these rights apply to? All these rights listed in the Constitution, like Amendments 1, 4, and 5, and a bunch of others, who do they apply to? Oh, certainly not to slaves. What about former slaves? What about free black people living in the northern free states? What about immigrants? To whom do these rules apply? To this day, we still fight about that, but I need to explain one thing that happened before the Civil War during that raging debate about, to whom do these rules apply, and that is a terrible, 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 terrible judicial opinion. Some people, including me, believe the worst one that the United States Supreme Court has ever decided, and that's the Dred Scott decision. The Dred Scott decision was authored by United States Supreme Court Chief Justice Roger Taney. And Justice Taney thought that he was going to solve this slavery issue and this race issue in the United States. And he actually made it worse. Dred Scott was a man. He was a black man. He was a slave. His owner, his master, took him from a slave state into a free state with him when he traveled. And Dred Scott made the case that, well, if you've taken me into a free place, I'm then no longer a slave, and so I sue for my freedom. That's what he did. He sued for his freedom. The Supreme Court of the United States said, not only is that not true, and they could have stopped right there. It still would have been a bad decision, a bad case, but they could have stopped right there and said, okay, we disagree. We don't think that's true. But the Chief Justice Taney, when he wrote this opinion, and remember I told you, judicial opinions are a type of law. This became the law when he wrote it. Not only is this man still a slave, but he said that black people don't even have the right to sue in court. It's the worst Supreme Court opinion ever issued. And instead of making things better, Taney made it worse because people up north who thought, this slavery thing sucks, we don't like it, but I don't know if we want to fight over it. When the Dred Scott decision came out, people up north who were already kind of on the fence went, okay, this might be worth fighting about. If they don't have any rights at all, I disagree. Those are human beings, clearly, so we're going to fight about it. And the folks up north who were already ready to fight, now they were really ready to fight. Now they were really ready to fight. And if you want to read about any of those folks, those white folks up north who were really ready to fight, I recommend looking up people like Thaddeus Stevens, Congressman Thaddeus Stevens, or United States Senator Daniel Webster. Those are some Northerners, white folks from up north who thought that slavery was a bunch of BS and that it was depriving human beings of life and liberty without due process of law. So, Civil War goes down. And Congress feels the need to pass the 14th Amendment, another post-Civil War amendment in the period that historians call Reconstruction, meaning the nation was being theoretically reconstructed into one nation. And the 14th Amendment, it does two things, two big things. It's a lot of words. One of the wordiest of the amendments, and it does two big things. Number one, it decides who is a citizen of the United States. Who is a citizen? What does it mean to be a citizen? All persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. It also says no state shall make a law that violates the rights of a person. And this is important because a big part of the Civil War was southern states saying we have a right to pass our own laws about slavery, and the northern states saying, nah, that's a federal thing. The federal government has ultimate power and jurisdiction over all the laws in the states. Southern states said, no, you don't. And so that first part of the 14th Amendment says, anyone born in the United States is a citizen. You're a citizen of the state that you live in, and the states cannot pass laws that override federal laws. If it violates the U.S. Constitution or federal law, that state law is invalid. It is not a good law. It's no longer the law. It also says, among other things, this amendment, a little bit more about due process. They kind of reinstate the due process, or kind of restate the due process clause of the Fifth Amendment. That's the one that says the government cannot deprive you of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. The 14th Amendment is a little bit of it is Congress saying, look, y'all, you southern states, but really everyone, just so you're listening, in case you didn't hear us the first time around, no deprivation of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. It's a big deal. And then the 14th Amendment also says that people must be treated equally under the law. Equally under the law. And I'm paraphrasing, but that's a huge deal. The 14th Amendment is used to this day. It's used all the time in court. It's used to make cases like in 2015 when several homosexual couples sued for the right to marry and be recognized married, including one couple from St. Matthews, from Louisville area in Kentucky. They were one of the parties to that lawsuit. They said, look, it's not right that a straight couple can go to Massachusetts and get married up there because they want to or because their family. It doesn't matter why. It's none of the government's business why they went there. They can go from Kentucky to Massachusetts. They can get a marriage license. They come back home to Kentucky, and that marriage license is valid. They have all the rights of a married couple. But a gay couple can't do the same thing. You're treating us differently under the law. Now, no matter how you feel about that, it is logical in the context of the 14th Amendment to say, well, we're not being treated equally under the law then. And that's what those couples said in 2015. The Supreme Court agreed. Go back a little further. Did y'all know, and y'all probably already know this, but it was illegal for a black and white person, heterosexual, like a white man, black woman, or other way around. It was illegal for them to get married in Kentucky and some other states until 1967. Now, y'all, that seems like a long time ago. It's less than 20 years before I was born. My parents were alive and well then. I mean, it's not that long ago. That's the scary thing about a lot of the equal rights and civil rights issues in the United States is that this wasn't like 100 years ago. It really wasn't that long ago that what I just said about gay couples and their right to be recognized as a married couple in Kentucky and some other states, that was true for interracial couples until 1967. A Supreme Court case called Loving versus Virginia, but it wasn't just Virginia, it was a few states, including Kentucky, that were part of that lawsuit. And the court applied the 14th Amendment. They said, listen, you're treating an all-white couple or an all-black couple differently than a couple that's one black person and one white person. So we're not going to have that, and we're going to say that if those people want to get married, and back in '67 they just meant straight couples, but still, they're saying that couple wants to get married, they can get married anywhere in the United States. And that's we use that amendment all the time. And it's also something that and this is now I know a little bit less about because it's so recent and so modern in our history, but it's also something where you can argue that that white people who were arrested and detained by police and pushed through the justice system are treated differently than black people. 14th Amendment says the government cannot treat people differently. That we must all be treated the same. Is that the way it always happens? No. But that's what the law says. So, anyway, that's what y'all need to know. And this is something, I'll say one more amendment, then we'll move on. And it's something that I hope y'all can think about. I'm going to make a statement here, and you might disagree, and that's fine, but I truly believe it. And that's that when people say, make America great again, talk about the good old days in this country, I always kind of give them the raised eyebrow kind of side eye and go, well, if I read the Constitution, the United States of America has the pieces in place to be a great nation, where people are treated the same under the law, and where there's as close as we can get to equal opportunity for economic prosperity, or for just general happiness and decent lives, however you define that, for everyone. The pieces in the Constitution are there to make that happen. It's up to us to make sure that happens, because we're not there yet. I don't have to tell y'all that. I mean, y'all know that. But we're not there yet. I used to think we were getting there, and now I look at what's going on today, and I'm not sure. But in fact, I know we're taking some steps backwards. But the Constitution has pieces like the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment that makes me think when I read it, we have the pieces in place. If we just do what this thing says, well, this part of the Constitution says, we can actually, we can make this a better place, a great, great nation. We just have a lot of work to do. Moving on, 15th Amendment, and this is a big one. 15th Amendment says, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. That means what it sounds like. It's saying that the government cannot keep you from voting because of your race, the color of your skin, or, and this is passed, and remember, right after the Civil War, or because you used to be a slave, or because you're the descendant of a slave. That's what it says. Now, is this thing always enforced? Sometimes. Depends. This has been an amendment that's had a hot and cold history of enforcement in this country, but that's what it says. Again, if we just did what this thing says, that no one's right to vote shall be denied or abridged, meaning even altered a little bit or changed because of race, color, or being a descendant of a slave, that would be a good thing. It'd make this country a lot better if that were really what happened. So those are some amendments. Now, I'm going to do a brief overview of the Civil Rights Movement and assign the final exam. If I were you, I'd take a break right now if you want to. It's a good place to pause. But I'm going to go right through this. And I apologize for how brief this is going to be, because I could do a whole semester on the Civil Rights Movement myself, and I'm not even the most qualified person at Simmons to teach that, I don't think. So, let me tell you, and this is the way I understand history, is in big chunks of cause and effect. Not memorizing names and dates, but cause and effect. What happened first? What did that lead to next? And I'll tell you that, and I'm going to keep this brief. But civil rights. I'm telling y'all stuff you already know for the most part, but I'll tell you how I understand it, and I hope you can it'll help you see it through a lens of how we got to where we are today and why government policies matter so much. And being that I am out in the woods and I'm covered in sweat and I got bugs all over the place, I'm not even going to look at my notes. I'm going to do this as best I can for you all, and then I'll assign the final. Several hundred years ago, Europeans and people of European descent start bringing African human beings over against their will and bondage to be slaves. You already know that. Why? Why Africans? Well, there's a number of reasons. One of which that doesn't get discussed enough in this country is the fact that a lot of Europeans tried enslaving the natives, the Native American Indians. Didn't work too well. One of the reasons that didn't work too well is that if you kidnap a Native American Indian against their will, and let's say you're in Virginia, or you're in what's now like Haiti on the island of Hispaniola, and you bring them back to your little European encampment, and you try to force them to do labor. They don't want to do it. They're not happy about it, so you get violent. They eventually run away. They run back home. They go to the village where they live. And then if you send other white people with guns out after them, and you're looking for them, and you go to the village and you say, "Hey, have you seen this slave run away?" They're like, "No, we don't know what you're talking about," because they're they'll hide that's their people, that's their family, and they'll hide them. So this is not the only reason that Europeans began bringing Africans over to be slaves in the Americas, but it was a big part of it. An African person who's been brought across the Atlantic Ocean in the terrifying, horrible Middle Passage, they can't just run back home. They can't walk back home. They can't swim back home. They're stuck. And early on in the process, you didn't have the sanctuary-type free states up north. And so this process begins. It's a process that I hope y'all have heard about in more detail in other classes, so I won't spend too much time on it. But it is a brutal process, arguably the most brutal form of slavery. There's been slavery throughout the history of the human species, but you can't really compare American slavery to Greek slavery or Roman slavery because they were different, or the times that the Jewish, the Hebrew people were enslaved. These were different conditions, and brutal conditions, the worst conditions of any type of slavery in the history of the world. It was absolutely brutal, and the United States fought a very, very bloody war to sort that out and to solve it. Did they solve all the problems related to race in this country? No. We still aren't even close to being there. But at least they meaning the northern states, the Union, officially ended slavery. Well, okay, that's cool. You end slavery. It's good. But then what? You pass these 3 amendments, 13, 14, and 15, amendments to the Constitution. Does that fix all the problems? No. But at least at first, there was a little bit of emerging prosperity. I'm not saying a lot. I'm not saying it was everyone. But among former slaves in the southern states and the ones who had moved north before, during, and after the Civil War. And then comes something that we came to call, in this country, Jim Crow. The Jim Crow era describes a period in this nation's history that people define it in different terms. I'll be very broad about it and say it was from the Reconstruction period after the Civil War up through about 1965. That's how long it lasted. It was a long time. And people define it more narrowly than that sometimes, but I'm going to talk about this entire period in which people who were the descendants of slaves and black people, for whatever reason they were in this country, if they were in southern states and some states that are kind of in between the north and south, like Kentucky, and Missouri, their life was not the same as white people. It just wasn't. And it's a historical fiction for people to say that it was. There were these states like Mississippi is one example where they had a section of their laws they called slave codes prior to the Civil War. It was the statutes passed by Mississippi's legislature and signed by Mississippi's governor that governed the rules around slavery in Mississippi and the rules pertaining to slaves. And they just they didn't have copy and paste back then, but they just copied a bunch of the same stuff, and they called them black codes instead of slave codes. So they were trying to keep as much slavery around as they could in some of these states. And these Jim Crow laws are the ones you have with segregation. You have, the federal government says 14th Amendment, treat everybody equally. So if you're going to have public school for white kids, you better have public school for black kids. And they're like, some of the states, not just southern states, a lot of states, including Kansas, for example, were going, okay, yeah, we'll have schools for black kids. Were they the same? No, they were not. Supreme Court case, Plessy versus Ferguson. Supreme Court says, oh, it's okay to have segregated everything as long as it's equal, separate but equal. Equal can still be separate. But were these facilities, were these services, were anything the government did equal for black and white people? No. No, 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 they were not. You want to buy a house, trying to get a housing loan, was it equal for black and white people? No, it was not. You want to send your kid to school? Were the schools equal? No, they were not. You want to go to a public swimming pool in a city? Black pool and white pool the same? If there was a black pool? No. How about a hospital? Was a hospital experience the same for a black patient and a white patient? No. No. There was some traction among radicals, and meaning progressive radicals, like white folks who wanted to, and their black folks fighting for equality, and their white allies in the turn of the century, around 1900, 19 teens, trying to fix some of these problems. But that process, the nation's attention was largely divided by 2 world wars. And I don't mean to lump that together. There was the First World War, the Great Depression, Second World War. The World War was really one long 30-some-odd-year process of the United States getting pulled into these European wars, but and fighting with Japan for control over a bunch of islands. And that's I don't mean to trivialize that. These wars killed millions and millions of people. Big deal, huge deal. But for black people in the United States and their white allies who were looking for equality from the government, things didn't change that much. I mean, I always tell students that people talk about the Great Depression, and I remember reading this when I was in some essay I don't remember the essay. I was in middle school where this essay about a young black girl in rural southern community during the Great Depression, and how they'd always hear on the radio and see in the newspapers that people said, "Oh, prosperity is around the corner. Good times will be coming back soon." But it was hard for black people to believe that, because for black people in the South overall, and in parts of the North too, things weren't that different. It's white people who had lost all their stock market investments and all their other things that made their lives more prosperous. And I mean, a lot of people, if they were poor before the Great Depression, they were poor during and after the Great Depression. There were some steps in the right direction. One notable step was when President Harry Truman issued an executive order to integrate the military. It didn't happen right away overnight, but his intentions were clear. He's like, these people are willing to fight. People of color have been willing to fight against white people since the American Revolution and the American Civil War. He didn't say this in his order, but Truman was a history nerd like me, so he understood that this was the case. In the Civil War, by the end of the war, approximately one out of eight Union soldiers, Northern soldiers, were black. And people go up to the world wars, and he's like, these people want to fight for this country that's treated them like this. Why have segregated units? Let's make sure we're treating all the troops the same. Again, it didn't happen overnight, but his intentions were clear. President Eisenhower passed a civil rights bill that was okay, had some voting rights provisions in it that were okay. And amidst all of this, the world wars, the 1950s, that's the Eisenhower era, 1950s. So I'm going for the first 50 years of the 20th century, that there was still violence. I mean, the lynching was, I've heard people try to downplay it. Oh, it didn't happen all the time. Like, okay, first of all, one lynching is too many. And second, the federal government was doing next to nothing to try to keep that down, try to keep that from happening. And it's a tragedy. It's a tragic thing. If any of y'all want to read more about the violence against African descendants of slaves during this Jim Crow era, I can send you some links and information about it. But it's depressing, infuriating stuff. So make sure you're in the right mindset to get pissed off, because read about this stuff. If you don't already know it, you'll be mad, and I don't blame you a bit. Maybe this is a time in our country's history we need to be mad. But I'm going to skip ahead. I told you I was going to oversimplify. I'm going to skip ahead. There were many people in the year 1960 election, who saw the victory of President John Kennedy as a victory for people of color, because the choice was between Senator John Kennedy and Vice President Richard Nixon, and Kennedy won a very close race. And of the two candidates, he was the one who was saying more of the right things about equal rights and people of color. He also very famously, when Dr. King was in jail, and there was some real fear that Dr. King was going to be lynched during the election cycle of 1960, John Kennedy and his brother, who was his campaign manager at the time and became Attorney General after that, it's Robert Kennedy, they intervened as best they could and were able to talk to Democrat politicians in Georgia and do all they could to help get Dr. King out of trouble. How much impact they had is debatable, but the fact is they tried, and that went a long way with black voters down south. And it helped Kennedy win the election. In fact, without black voters, he would not have. From the second half of the 20th century up to the present day, no Democrat wins the presidency without black voters. I hate it when people say, oh, black people vote, the black vote this, the black vote that. Black people are different people. They don't all think alike, and so I hate it when white politicians talk about the black vote and this. But truth is, a majority of black voters since the 1960s do tend to vote for Democrats in presidential elections, and Democrats know that, Republicans know that, and ever since, I can go from the Democrat presidents, Kennedy. After that, the next one after that would be Lyndon Johnson. Next one after that, Jimmy Carter. Next one after that, Bill Clinton. Next one after that, Barack Obama. None of those men would have won the presidency, those Democrats, without the black vote, without black people, majority of black people voting for them. So, that being said, President Kennedy wins, gets assassinated, as you know. November of 1963, he's killed. Vice President Lyndon Johnson from Texas, he becomes the president. Now, he's this big, burly, good old boy Southerner from Texas. You might look at that guy and think he wouldn't be the most open-minded on trying to achieve some equality through the law and trying to enforce the 14th and 15th Amendments of the Constitution. Turns out he was. He was one that was open to that. He had many flaws as a man and as a president, but he did some really positive stuff in the way of racial equality, or trying to fix inequality in this country. He didn't fix it entirely, because that's maybe an impossible task, at least for any one president, but he did a lot. Passed the Civil Rights Act in 1964, Voting Rights Act a few months later, things that said, listen, South and some other parts of the country, in case you can't read the Constitution, the federal government's going to spell that out for you. President Johnson did a lot for people of color, especially for African descendants of slaves. More than almost any other president, except for a couple of other obvious ones. We've had 44 presidents, and he's in the top 2 or 3 as far as trying. All our presidents, except for President Obama, of course, have been white men, and of those, President Johnson's in the top 2 or 3 as far as who has really tried to do the most for black people. And so he passes some legislation. And the way I learned about the civil rights movement when I was in high school was that he passed some legislation, and so the civil rights era ended, which is nonsense. I think y'all know that. That's nonsense. We're still, if we can define the civil rights movement as a popular movement by the American people, or some of the American people, towards equality for all races, or even if we define it as towards equal rights for black people or African descendants of slaves, we're not done. That work is not over. Not even close. that is my very, very brief overview. If you want to know more about what happened after that, as far as public policy and government and politics go, send me a text or an email, and I'd be happy to send you information or have a conversation with you about it. A lot of stuff happened in the 1990s, that 80s and 90s actually, that really had a negative impact. It seemed like good ideas to some white politicians at the time. I don't mean just Republicans. I mean people like Bill Clinton. It seemed like, and Joe Biden, that seemed like good ideas at the time, and really, really harmed people of color and black people in particular in a number of ways. So let me know if y'all want to know more about that. But for now, as promised, this has been the longest video ever. Hope you took that break in the middle. If you didn't, take one now, or don't. Watch this at your own convenience. But this is important. This is very, very important. I need this assignment in by Sunday, and the assignment is this. Choose one amendment to the United States Constitution, one of the amendments, and tell me how it is still relevant today. That's it. There are 26, I believe, amendments total. We talked about 6 of them today. Pick one. Tell me how it is still relevant today. Why it is still important today. Tell me that in your own words, as much detail as you want. Get it to me by Sunday. All of you right now have A's. I mean, right as of this moment, your grades either range from a low, like an A minus, to an A for the whole class. So get this into me. Continue the quality of work you've done for the first 2 assignments, and you'll do well in the class. Thank you all so much for watching this long video. Thank you for getting that assignment to me by Sunday so I can get it to the administration Monday morning. Thank you.